Hi, friends. Welcome to Discovering the Lutheran Faith, Session 3. Today, we're going to be looking at the Apostles' Creed, Part 1, and I want to invite you to turn your workbooks to page 26. And as you do so, I want to share with you a little something about our Christian faith. This workbook is based on a wonderful tool that Martin Luther developed in the early 1500s. See, Luther, when he went out to different people's homes that were part of his church, he discovered they didn't know the simple, basic things of the Christian faith. And so he wanted to give them a teaching tool that they could use to teach their children what we call the most important parts of the Christian faith, or the 6 chief parts of the Christian faith. And he put those in what's known as Luther's Small Catechism. And it's developed around a question and answer form of teaching. And so this entire course is kind of built along that process. We'll ask a question, we'll give an answer, we'll look at what the Bible has to say. Now, these 6 chief parts are real simple. They begin with the Apostles' Creed, where we're starting today. This tells us who is God. Then we'll look at the 10 Commandments. This tells us not only how do we relate to God, but also how we relate to others, as it shows us also our need for Jesus. Then we'll talk about the Lord's Prayer, which is how we pray to God, how we talk to God, how we learn to trust God for all things. Then we'll talk about our baptism, which is how God brings us into the family of God. Then we'll talk about Holy Communion, how God sustains and nurtures our faith on a week in, week out basis as we remember what Jesus has done for us. And then we'll talk about confession, where God brings to us the forgiveness of sins and restores our relationship with Him when there is a brokenness caused by sin. And so today, we're going to be looking at Session 3, the Apostles' Creed, Part 1. And we're going to wrestle with this question: who is God? Now, in our world that we live in, it's very understandable that there's a lot of people who ask this question: who is God? And we live in a world today where, quite frankly, there's so many different opinions about God, who He is and how He works, and is it a he? Is it a she? Is it an it? Is there multiple gods, singular God? There is a vast diversity when it comes to understanding who God is. In fact, what we kind of see in our world today is that people are taking a salad bar approach to God. And so let's kind of pick and choose the different things that we like about God. Sometimes we even like to shape God into the image that fits best for us. And then for a lot of people, they actually believe that God, all these different religious paths kind of lead in the same direction. But I've been studying religion and God for a long time, and what I've discovered is that not every path leads to the same conclusion. In fact, they all kind of lead to different places. And so when you look at things from Islam to Judaism to Buddhism to Hinduism to a variety of tribal religions, they all have a different conclusion about who is God. So if you go into your workbooks on page 26, let's wrestle with this topic for a moment. As you look at the world, I believe that there are typically 4 basic views of God, and I'm going to throw in a bonus one today. So the first way that people look at God is from what we call a monotheistic perspective. That is, there is one God. And this incorporates religions like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the 3 major religions of the world. Most people are monotheistic when it comes to their understanding of God. And so there's a singular God. What sets Christianity apart from Judaism and Islam is our understanding of Jesus to be God and the Trinity, which we'll explore a little bit later on in this session. Now, second is what we call polytheism. And polytheism is the idea that there are multiple gods that exist. Places like India with Hinduism and the kind of the Eastern cultures of Shintoism and Taoism, and then also kind of pagan religions for Wicca, all have a polytheistic view of God. I remember the first time I ran into kind of polytheism, I was on my vicarage, which is an internship where I learned how to be a pastor. And my next door neighbor in the apartment complex that my wife and I were living in at the time was Hindu. And one day he invited us over to have some ice cream, and it was wonderful. We had a great time learning a little bit about his culture and his beliefs. And there was all these images up on the walls everywhere. And I asked him, I said, "What are all these things on the wall?" And he said, "Well, those are my gods." And then he began to explain the different gods that were found throughout his apartment. Not all of them, but there was close to 300 gods in his apartment. And it was a very surreal moment, kind of running up into that path of me being Christian and having one God, and him being Hindu and having over 300 gods. And so that's what polytheism is. Now, to go alongside polytheism is what we call pantheism, right? This is where God is in everything. And some of those religions that are that are polytheistic can also be pantheistic. And pantheism says God is in the earth and the wind and the fire and the rain. God is in the animals. God is in everywhere, including in us. We're all little gods, if you will. And that's kind of a pantheistic approach, that just God is in everything. And then this is kind of the bonus one. This isn't in your workbook, but you can write it off to the side. There's this agnostic approach to God, where I recognize that there's some kind of higher power, but I don't really have a name for it, and I don't really understand who it is, but I kind of understand that there's something out there kind of making things go, if you will. And then lastly, and this is one that is not a dominant viewpoint, but it exists, is atheism, where God does not exist. And there is no God, and so it kind of has no image of God. And atheism kind of falls in this category. Buddhism, in essence, kind of falls in this category too, because in Buddhism, there is no concept of God. It's more of a philosophy, and some people pick and choose gods to kind of tag alongside of Buddhism, right? As Christians, then, our understanding of God is unique and is best described in one of our ancient creeds called the Apostles' Creed. That's our next session. So we're going to go there. We're going to continue in part 2 as we look at the Apostles' Creed.